The dive boat we're on is called the Mermaid 2, which departs out of Bali. As you can see from the map, this is actually a fair ways from Komodo, but Bali is obviously an easier place to get to from a lot of places. Most days we would be in the water on our first dive at 7:30 a.m., but since there was the long crossing from Bali over to Moyo Island, we basically had nothing to do but sit around and relax until noon. I've always had the habit of waking up extra early on dive boats, so I get a little bit of time just sitting around and enjoying things before everybody else is up and about. Around noon local time, we were finally close to Moyo Island, and it was time to have our dive briefing and get in the water. One of the great luxuries of diving on the Mermaid 2 is they actually ferry you out and pick you up from the dive site in a dinghy, so there is no surface swim. Once we were above our dive site, we all rolled backwards off the boat and descended into the crystal clear 84-degree water. Jen had had a little bit of trouble equalizing, so she had to take it nice and slow as we descended. The dive plan had us following the side of this massive reef and then eventually ending up on the shallows up top. And as you can see, the biodiversity out here is just stunning. Any place you look, there were massive schools of anthea and other fish, and looking close at any rock showed an endless assortment of corals and small critters. A good chunk of the dive was spent down at 70 or 80 feet, just floating along this wall, looking at whatever caught our fancy. When we had done this same dive back in 2019, it had been my first dive really in warm water gear, and I ended up blowing through my air and just feeling so off that I really didn't get to enjoy it despite just seeing spectacular views in every direction. That is why we had gone out of our way to do the USAT Liberty dive before we got on the Mermaid, to kind of get that out of the way so we could just enjoy this for what it was. As a result, we were able to get a solid 60 plus minutes out of our aluminum 80 tanks. And after a few more dives, we'd be stretching that past 70 minutes. The brown, kind of rubbery looking coral you see carpeting the ground here is actually called fire coral. It's called that because if you end up coming into contact with it, you will get a really painful chemical burn that will last for weeks and weeks. I happen to know this because I inadvertently came into contact with some in Florida a couple of years ago. One of the questions I'm always getting from non-divers is, aren't you afraid of sharks down there? In actuality, the sharks we see are usually a treat, and they're really, really shy. Here we had a couple of black-tip reef sharks that were sleeping under one of the corals, and then we saw a few off in the distance swimming around. When our tanks were running low on air, our guide Katut put up an SMB, which signaled the dinghy driver to be there when we surfaced after our safety stop. There was a bit of effort involved in climbing into the dinghy, but once you're in it, they ferry you right back to the boat where you can clean your gear and stow everything for the next dive. One dive down, you can tell by the amount of frizz coming up, and it went all good except Jen had a little bit of an issue with her ears. So boat bathrooms are incredibly efficient because you can take a dump, brush your teeth, and shower all at the same time. After the first dive, the boat had to relocate to Satonda Island, so we had a little bit of time to just sit around and relax after eating a very, very hefty lunch.
Here's the beach part, and here there's access.
Go!
Diving with long hair has been a bit of a learning challenge so far. If you're wondering why I have so much footage of clownfish when they're such a common fish, Jen really, really loves them, especially when they are hiding in their anemones, so I tend to record them since it brings her a lot of joy. One of the other things that's mentioned in a lot of the liveaboard materials and dive briefings is the pygmy seahorse. Of course, since I'm filming in a GoPro, you can't get a really good idea of what they look like since they're so small. While most of the time spent on the boat is either eating, sleeping, or diving, there are a few shore excursions mixed in. The first was to Satonda Island, where there is an old volcano crater in the center filled with water.
Swim fast enough to get it back out the water.
Actually, I don't know how to use it. I bought it, but
After that, it was back to the boat to get ready for our third and final dive of the day, which was going to be a night dive.
Area, just push a little bit with your hands.
Night dives are a very different experience from diving during the day. Since you can only see whatever you're shining your light at, they can feel claustrophobic to some people, but also they give us the opportunity to see a lot of different critters that just aren't out during the day. Unfortunately, since I'm filming with a GoPro, even with the dive video lights I have, it can be really hard to capture things at night, particularly anything that is on the smaller end. Another one of Jen's favorite is cuttlefish. We found this one hanging out on the sand, though he wasn't very active, probably due to our lights. After the dive, the dinghy retrieved us back to the dive deck where the hostess was waiting with hot chocolate. And then it was time to file into the galley to eat. I am trying to process all the video I'm taking as I go, so I'm up kind of late. 6:30 a.m. wake up.